I'm Samuel Victorio Mandez. I'm in the Colorado Department of Corrections, and I was placed in solitary confinement since I was 19. When they're supposed to take you to recreation, there's little rooms they put you in with a pull-up bar, take you out and take a shower. Usually that's the way, your day would happen, and a lot of times, they'll be, have us on lockdown, or we don't get that stuff. We just have to stay in our cell. There's nothing for you to do over there but figure out how you feel about being in that cell all the time.
The best way I can describe solitary confinement is being buried alive. You understand everything going around you, but you can't do anything about it. You're helpless. You're trapped inside your head almost, like being in a coma. It's also sensory deprivation to the max. In your cell, all you see is gray. I mean, you can't put decorations on your wall. When you're actually in solitary confinement, you don't get to see people's faces for the most part. You can go years talking to somebody through a vent or a door and not know what they look like. It's extremely loud because people have to yell at each other through vents and through doors. All day, all night long, people are screaming. You have so many people in there that are seriously mentally ill, and there's people singing Christmas carols at 2 in the morning. One of the things that you really get into it with the guards is when they have a tray slot on the metal door and they would slam it shut. But because your hearing is so sensitive, when they slam it, it's just excruciating. And I did about 8 years, just under 8 years. And after 16 years, like you're a mess. The strongest mentality has some serious issues after that. Most people aren't that strong though. So yeah, you can break after a couple years. 16 years, I can't even fathom what that would be like.
Me and Sam were pretty close. In high school, we used to walk home together, or junior high, I should say. We'd walk home together because his grandparents lived on 5th Street and I lived on 2nd Street. I liked about Sam, I think, the most is just his personality. He was always happy, always, ready to help. His grandparents were pretty elderly even back then, and so he was always doing their yard work or going out and, helping his grandma do whatever. He always was respectful. Like if his grandpa told him something, he just went and did it. He didn't question it. He didn't argue about it. I wish I could say the same for my own children, but that's the type of person he was.
Sam was just full of energy. He was always a joy to be around. If he'd come in the room, it was always brighter. He had a lot of confidence. It was at one of the girls' quinceañeras, and he had a really nice tuxedo on. He was able to stand up there and talk in front of a lot of people. And I don't think everyone can do that. It takes someone special to be able to stand up and not be nervous, but that's how he was. I never remember Sam ever sitting around doing nothing or watching a lot of TV and stuff. Sam was a real outdoors kind of kid. Playing, riding his bike, a lot of sports. I know he went to the Boys and Girls Club a lot.
My relationship with Sam was a friend and coach. I really respected him as a young man. The club was Sam's home away from home. We had a lot of programs to offer Sam, and he got involved in all of them, and he's always involved in doing something positive for the club, and the other kids. Always appreciated the other kids and the staff, and he had a lot of respect for the staff people there. If he didn't hear you, he would say, "What did you say, sir?" Or, "Ma'am, what did you say?" Or, "Miss, what did you say?" He was always very polite And he respected us because he knew that we did a lot for him and sister.
When I first met Sam, Sam had never played organized baseball. He was very polite, and I didn't have one problem with him. He was straight arrow. But I used him as a pinch hitter in the late innings when we were tied, and he hit a home run that won the game, and he was real excited. And he turned out to be an exceptional baseball player.
He was a good kid. He came to practice all the time. He didn't cause trouble. He was a very quiet person, but yet when he spoke, people listened. And he's not threatening anything. He's saying something that meant something to everybody. That's how he was. He was very good in sports. He was good in football too. And he wanted to go to college. He said, I'd like to go to school. I don't have any money. I'm working on it. I've got jobs that I put money away for college. And he said, I'm trying. And I said, well, you hang right in there. When next year or so, call me and I'll get the coach from UNC to come down and look at you. I would take him as my kid. Yes, I would. And there ain't very many that I would take.
Really wish I could be there to support you and the family. Proud to be your son, and I thank you for you raising me and bringing me up and always being there for me. I'm trying to make myself better so I can overcome all this. You know, only a fool doesn't learn from his mistakes, but I've learned from mine, so I plan to change. It's just a matter of time. I'm sure you'll be looking upon us and being proud of us, waiting for us to all be together again. I know for sure we will be, so it's just a matter of waiting. But we don't have to wait too long. I know that for sure.
My name is Jeffrey Metzner. I'm a forensic psychiatrist. I'm also a clinical professor of psychiatry at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. I was asked to do a psychiatric evaluation on Mr. Mandez for purposes of diagnosis and treatment recommendations. Sam has been housed in the equivalent of administrative segregation housing units, which means he's been locked down in a cell for generally 23 out of 24 hours per day ever since 1997, which is over 16 years of his incarceration. He's been under very harsh conditions of confinement. Prior to examining Sam, I was provided with voluminous records to review. Records from the Colorado Department of Correction, records from the Colorado Mental Health Institute, evaluations done when he was initially incarcerated in the reception center through the Colorado Department of Corrections. None of those records indicated that he was experiencing or suffering from a serious mental illness.
When I first got into CSP, you know, they had me in this one unit. You know, sometimes I started talking to some if it was when I listened to the radio, I talked like if I was talking to some female or something, but to myself. And then all of a sudden, you know, I heard somebody saying some things back to me. It was a female. She probably talked to me and monitor me, I guess, what she would do for it was probably a couple months, and then so it was around 1997 she started talking to me at CSP that I heard, and I just like I've been telling him, you know, I'm just a normal guy, and this stuff never happened to me before, you know. I really don't know what's going on with that, you know. But I don't know if everyone was talking to somebody. It was just me that I knew.
I've been presented with a timeline of Sam's progression in the criminal justice system, and unfortunately, I'm very familiar with this type of timeline. That is, someone comes into prison and looks relatively stable. Somewhere along the line in prison, they have breakdowns. The breakdowns become worse, their functioning becomes worse, so that what happens during the course of their time in prison is, rather than being rehabilitated, they're basically being severely damaged. This is a human rights abuse on the face of it. We've actually created the mental illness.
I've done research on the effects of solitary confinement for decades, and solitary confinement has negative effects on all people who enter it in varying degrees, but the mentally ill particularly suffer in these environments. Solitary confinement is a depressing environment. It's an incredibly stressful environment, so the mentally ill find it very difficult to get through the day, but also find it increasingly difficult to control their symptoms. So their symptoms begin to exacerbate or worsen. Sometimes they become so frustrated that they are angry and they act out. Sometimes the acting out is acting out against the environment or shouting or arguing with correctional officers because they can't control their inner impulses. So there are a whole range of symptoms that can either be created in this environment, even in healthy people, or exacerbated in the case of mentally ill people.
When I talk about his condition, what I'm talking about is he has a chronic psychotic illness that is characterized by paranoid, delusional beliefs, grandiose beliefs, auditory hallucinations, and a thought disorder.
My hands are fully contracted by the boxing associations. Yeah, they started training me, and I started winning crowns and bouts and things. I had my second championship. I boxed at Madison Square Gardens, and I brought my dad out there. I brought my dad to come and watch me box at Madison Square Gardens, and I won another belt in that fight.
He'll tell you in a very matter-of-fact way that he was a Green Beret when he was 12 years old, that he's married to the daughter of Dog the Bounty Hunter, that he was the primary architect of Denver International Airport, that he has 11 children. They are examples of grandiose thinking.
All of us have our identities grounded in our social interactions, our social relationships. When you take people out of that social context, it destabilizes them, and it destabilizes even healthy people. They begin to falter in terms of knowing who they are. Mentally ill people suffer much worse in an environment like this, because they typically already have a destabilized sense of self. And if you put them in an environment where they no longer have a social context, where they no longer have relationships with other people, it can have a profound effect, a worsening effect on their mental illness. Many of them retreat further into a fantasy world. They create a world to live in, which is in some ways less painful from the world around them.
It's unfortunate that so many people in our society today with mental illness are consigned to jails and prisons, because in jails and prisons there is a culture of punishment. Once someone is identified as acting badly, then the officers tend to see them that way from that time forward. That is the wrong mindset for working with people with mental illness. We know in psychology that negative punishments do not work to help people improve their behavior, but rewards and support when people do the right thing is what really works. The culture of punishment which permeates the prison system just is anti-therapeutic.
Found hanging in my vent real high by the ceiling, and they came in. For me, the thoughts that was going through my head is, there's nothing here that anybody would want. To me, it just seemed like I had a better place to go to than.
There are very high rates of self-harm in solitary confinement engaged in by mentally ill prisoners. Self-harm involving either self-mutilation or even suicide attempts or successful suicides. Highest rates of suicide anywhere in any prison system takes place inside solitary confinement. And I think in part the cause is the desperation that people feel in this kind of an environment.
They said for me hanging myself, I was abusing medical treatment. They wrote a disciplinary report, and they charged me the restitution for the hospital also, over $10,000 that they charged me for into my account. I don't have $10,000 to give them.
I believe this is a problem in Colorado in the residential treatment program, where prisoners who are identified as mentally ill, they're in treatment, but they spend most of their days in solitary. Well, that worsens their mental illness, so the treatment isn't really doing any good. For certain, putting someone in a solitary cell and giving them psychiatric medications is foolhardy. They are not going to get better. That is not an acceptable mental health treatment practice.
He really needs either an inpatient level of care or a residential treatment level of care in which he is offered minimally at least 10 hours per week of out-of-cell time that's unstructured, and that means recreational time, and at least another 10 hours a week of structured therapeutic activity. If the treatment plan recommended is implemented, Mr. Mandez will be able to progress from a high security RTP to a general population RTP. And I think that will then allow him to eventually progress to a structured setting within the community.
Sam was convicted of a crime that occurred when he was 14 years old. He was sentenced to mandatory life without parole. That means that a judge could give him no other sentence than life without parole. We were appointed to represent Sam to try to get him a new sentencing hearing. When we first met Sam, he was very distrustful of us. He didn't understand that we were trying to help him or really why anyone would help him.
For us, what makes Sam's case so unique is he went into prison at a very young age and almost immediately into solitary confinement. He's spent now probably close to half his life in solitary confinement. That changes a person.
But as we've spent time with Sam, we have gained his trust, and we see glimpses of what he was and what he could be if he received mental health treatment.
In 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court handed down a decision called the Miller case that prohibits mandatory life without parole sentences for juveniles. When Sam was convicted, the court was not allowed to hear any of the information that the Supreme Court now has said is important. So we are asking for a new sentence for Sam because the original one is now held to be unconstitutional.
So our first objective is to get him the mental health treatment that he needs. And the only way he can get that in prison is if the Department of Corrections provides it.
And the second objective is to get Sam a fair sentence.
In Colorado and in the rest of the country, there are far too many prisoners locked up for far too long in these conditions of long-term isolation, deprived of any normal human contact. This form of incarceration is actually the most expensive. It does nothing to rehabilitate prisoners or prepare them for their return to society. And depriving someone of normal human contact for such a long time is also inhumane. That's why every court that's looked at this issue has held that for seriously mentally ill prisoners, these conditions of long-term isolation violate the Constitution's ban on cruel and unusual punishment.
The American Civil Liberties Union of Colorado has 4 urgent policy recommendations for the Colorado Department of Corrections. 1, bar all seriously mentally ill prisoners from placement in solitary confinement. 2, ensure that there are mental health staff involved in all disciplinary decisions related to mentally ill prisoners. 3, ensure all mentally ill prisoners have adequate out-of-cell time where they can have therapeutic activity as well as pro-social activity. And 4, ensure that there are enough mental health care providers to provide the intensive mental health treatment that seriously mentally ill prisoners need.
We're calling on the Colorado Department of Corrections to take steps now to get seriously mentally ill prisoners out of solitary confinement and into treatment. And we're also urging Colorado residents to contact their legislators, urge them to support a bill that will get seriously mentally ill prisoners out of long-term solitary and into treatment.